Today, we're exploring best practices of identifying and attracting and retaining talent. It's not garden variety recruiting. It's focused. It's proven effective. It's purpose designed. And with that, I want to welcome our guest expert today, Andrea Rishmawi, co-founder and CEO of 180 Collective. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dave. Good morning, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about just why we launched our agency, and it's really relevant to the topic today. So, one of the things that we were most excited about when launching this agency with my co-founder is really making an impact, not just making placements. And we really want to make sure that we can do that for you today. We have a lot of senior leaders in the room, and we're going to focus the content today on hiring practices built for leadership and senior individual contributors. So this can be applied kind of across the board, but the area of focus for our firm is what we've built the practices for, and that's what we do is leadership and like very senior individual contributors. The information that we're going to cover today is a little bit, I would say, of our secret sauce that enables us to deliver really incredible results for our client, which you'll see on the screen here, and you may have seen 3 seconds ago because, again, we made some changes to the presentation last night. Dave is going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions that come up, please just write those questions in the chat. He will feel free to interrupt me. And if it's something that I'm not going to be covering later, I'll jump in, ask the question, and make sure that everyone has clear answers. Sound good? Great. I want to take a quick poll. So Tiago, if you could launch the poll. What I want to know are, what are your biggest hiring frustrations today? And I'm going to put them up on the screen here. You can pick 3 from this list. So your team can't agree on who to hire. You wasted too many interview cycles. Your candidates are dropping out, or they're not accepting offers. The position's remaining unfilled for months. The hiring process feels inconsistent or broken, or you've made bad hires that have set you back. So if everyone could just take 30 seconds and pick the 3 that are most relevant for you. So it looks like most of you are struggling with these things. So what Dave talked about here looks like, honestly, there's a fairly even split with candidates dropping out or not accepting offers and too many wasted interview cycles, like weeks of interviews without a clear winner as the leaders here. And that's no surprise. These are very common roadblocks. When I offer this poll, this is always the case, right? It might, which 2 or 3 stand out will differ, but every time there are people that have experienced every single one of this. So this is, exactly why hiring feels broken for so many teams, because you're getting these results and you're not sure why. So we can go ahead and close that poll. Here's the thing. All of these challenges lead to one or more of these 3 major issues. You're either wasting time, you're wasting money, or you have a frustrated team, or all 3. Now, especially in a startup or a lean company, when hiring is not done effectively, it is really a strain on everybody, and it affects everybody's ability to be productive with their own work, on top of making time to shuffle in the additional work of an empty seat, right? So when a company is experiencing these types of issues, the immediate reaction is to revamp the interview process. And yes, that is often a complicating factor, but it is not the only factor. So in this training, we're going to address solutions not just to the issues that you see here, but really to the top 3 root causes that you see here. In order to fix the interview process, we will show you how to lay the foundation in the preceding stages to that. So the first of those is a lack of clarity. That's a root cause for all of these things. And when I say clarity, what I mean is getting crystal clear about who is best suited to solve the related business problems, which, by the way, means getting crystal clear on what your actual business problems are and why you're hiring for the role in the first place. And then really getting into granular detail and speccing out a role as it relates to that organization specifically. Even if you have an experienced hiring manager who's hired for, say, a director of marketing or any other role in the past, like getting clear on the needs of the team today, like maybe the person that left that seat open, took some skill sets away that the rest of the team doesn't have. And so now you need to hire for those things. So it's getting that level of clarity and being able to tell the story around it. That's what clarity means here. And then secondly, there's almost always a lack of alignment among the team, right? So agreement on what's expected, who you're targeting, and how to frame that. And then finally, you'll see a weak interview process. It's going to be a big part of that as well. And really, I would say undefined evaluation structure, which we'll speak to today. So these root cause concerns manifest as the frustrations that we talked about in the poll, needlessly lengthy searches, poor candidate experience, declined offers, misaligned candidates, oftentimes bad hires, and they're issues for every single company, especially important for any company going through a transition, going through an adjustment, going through scale, going through M&A, or one that is in early stages. Getting people right is so critical, and the act of building clarity and alignment will inherently create team cohesion. And today we'll give you these best practices to set yourself up for a successful, efficient interview process. And again, these are the same processes that we employ with our clients. Of course, it's a lot easier when you have a third party kind of fully dedicated to setting you up for success. But I know that you're going to walk away today with the knowledge about 3 specific topics that you can employ immediately and will make a difference. So you should leave today armed with information on how to get clarity, how to get alignment, and how to have a strong interview process. Clarity, I would say, is the secret sauce. It's to the secret sauce to the what and the who. And if you get that part right, that sets the stage. As I mentioned earlier, it's the foundation for the rest of your process. And once you have that, you will take the steps to define that for your entire team, to align the team on it, and the interview process will follow. As a note, as I mentioned earlier, what we presented to the regional group, we included a section then on interview structure. But instead of doing that, I revamped the information today because I want to offer the key points to creating a strong interview process, regardless of what your structure is. So today we'll talk about really what are the key components of a strong interview process, how to make sure that you get it right, and how to tie all these things together. So let's dive in. So the first piece of clarity is role definition. It's the key component, and it is a tool that we use for nearly every single role we take on for clients, from executive leaders through to individual contributors, because oftentimes the simple act of getting clarity on this changes the scope of who you thought you needed to hire in the first place. I'm going to walk you through 2 very quick case studies that really highlight how this process can influence the profile of who you think or who you hire. So in this example, we worked with a health tech client. They came to us because they needed to backfill a director level sales role. And after we took them through our discovery process, we advised them actually to level up the role to a VP in order to solve the actual business problems that they were facing. This role had been open for almost a year. Their revenues were falling, and they just assumed that they only needed to backfill this previous director of sales seat. But when they looked at the issues that the department and the overall company were facing, we helped them realize that a small up level to a VP would make a massive difference, not only to their revenue, but also to their leadership team, which now had a pretty big hole. So we targeted and interviewed more relevant candidates because we up leveled the role, looked at a different skill set, a bit more strategic, a bit less hands on. And what we found were these results. So within the first 3 years, that VP, who was remote because they were only considering in-person candidates previously, had achieved 10 to 15% year-over-year growth all 3 years. They implemented scalable growth processes, improved retention. So the key takeaways here, as I mentioned, really you need to look at your current situation and really think through the problems you're having today and what you need to hire for versus just saying, great, we need to hire for this title position. And then it's not always the case of needing a bigger person in a role, right? In this example, we actually leveled down. So we were brought into a small manufacturing company. They had a fairly new CEO, and she was really facing significant challenges in production and productivity. And what she really needed was a strong second in command, or what we call a right hand. She needed somebody who could be more hands on. She had too much on her plate as a CEO. She was working too much in the business. She was too caught up in the day to day, and she needed someone to take all that off of her plate so she could focus on being the visionary leader. They'd had 2 failed attempts. They hired poorly full-time, and then they hired an interim CEO, both of who came through their network as a referral. And we see this so often. People think just because somebody is referred to the company by someone on the board or someone on the executive team or someone else in the organization, they think they're going to be a good fit. And so they're not doing the work to really understand, can this person solve the problems we have today? At the end of our discovery process, we found that they actually needed to level down, as I mentioned. So they leveled down to a VP of ops who could be much more hands on. They benefited from a massive savings in salary. They got a very hands on candidate to take those things off her plate. He fit the culture needs that they had. And in both of the cases that I talked about here, right, it's about directly linking the results that you want to the person you need to hire and not hoping that the person that you need to hire can deliver on the results when you haven't really thought through exactly what you need. So now we are going to go through a very detailed but also still high level version of what we take our clients through in that discovery process. So if you are taking notes, this is when you'll want to. So first, let's talk about why. If you're a Simon Sinek fan, we all know that the why is important in anything that we do. Not just why is it open, but what story are you going to tell, right? Let's say that you're filling a seat because your most recent COO quit unexpectedly and he, was caught in some kind of scandal and it's all over the news. What do you want your team to know about that? Or how do you want them to tell the story, right? Just like you have spin in a news story, just like you have a PR team, you need to think about consistency in terms of what is being relayed to candidates and ultimately what will define your company's hiring reputation. So that's a really important component, just really getting clear on why is this role open. And that's a very specific case. But in reality, like we talked about earlier, are you backfilling the role? What happened to the person? If that person was fired, why don't we think about why they were let go and what things to look out for as we hire a new person? And maybe they had the wrong skill set, or maybe they left for a bigger opportunity because there wasn't a growth path in the role. And so you know that you need to bring somebody in who's key component for taking a role is not I want to grow into the next level within the first year of taking this role. So the why piece is very, very important, and making sure that you're all telling a consistent story in terms of the why. The second is really what problems will they solve and how will they be measured? So take the time here to not just think about the immediate problems, but think about the impact they'll have. How will solving those problems affect your team and your customers? So maybe you're hiring for customer success and your customer success team is today incredibly inefficient, right? And the new VP of customer success will change that. That's going to change also your retention numbers. Well, retention numbers will affect your revenues, and retention numbers affecting your revenues affecting your sales team or maybe your ops team. There are a lot of kind of things that you could extrapolate from one good hire or one bad hire and the problems that person will solve. Dave, go ahead.
There's a question in the chat, Andrea, from Dr. Jim Souza. He asks, in defining what you need in the role, do you also define the individual leadership qualities and competencies that are important?
Jim, I'm guessing, is a guy who likes to get ahead because we are definitely going to cover both of those things shortly.
He definitely likes to get ahead. Good to
Right.
know.
Yeah, good. So Jim's the brown noser in the class. Now I know. I understand. All right. So yes, Jim will definitely get to that. Those are really important in what I would call competencies. So in terms of the problems that they're going to solve, again, how will they be measured, right? So we'll take that VP of customer success as an example. Understanding what metrics they're going to be tied to is really important. It's a very easy step to skip, though, in the interview process. I have seen so many times we go through an interview process, they hire for a specific skill set, and then they give this person the metrics, and that person wasn't clear going in that they'd be responsible for those specific metrics. So explaining to them how they're measured and knowing that they're comfortable being measured that way will be important. It's also, of course, something that you can look to in their experience as you're interviewing. Hey, listen, this role will be held to these metrics. We'd like to know how you performed on those in the past. The next one, how hands-on will they be? I mean, this could be an entire presentation in itself, or at least an entire slide, right? Even when a role is extremely strategic, even if you are a C-suite, there are always executional components that we need to outline. We really commonly hear from clients, well, we hired an executive, but they're not hands-on enough. They can't relate to the team, or they expect to have infinite resources rather than rolling their sleeves up. Well, you saw the example that I gave earlier, right? She was looking to hire a COO and she didn't realize how hands-on someone really needed to be. And that's why she down-leveled the role. So the question here is, have you defined exactly what it means to be hands-on? The term hands-on is much like the term culture fit, right? It is extremely vague. So if this is a CFO role, does that mean that they're doing journal entries? Or does it mean that they'll be hands-on with the P&L enough that they understand the levers they need to pull to achieve a target EBITDA? Those are two very different things, and defining how hands-on and the way that they'll be hands-on is very important. The next piece I would say is collaboration. So defining this piece will also help to inform your interview panel. So who will they collaborate with and who will report to them? Who will they work with across the organization, et cetera? And then I love this last question. What past experiences will inform their approach? We have an active search right now for a product management leader with a pharmacy technology company. And I really love the hiring manager's approach here because instead of saying, well, product either needs to come from marketing or it needs to come from engineering, which one do you want? We said, why don't we understand what the rest of the team looks like? And he said, listen, our engineering team is extremely strong. And he said, our pharmacy knowledge internally is extremely strong. So I don't really need somebody that comes from an engineering background. I think somebody that's worked with engineering teams and can relay the information to them is great. And I don't really need somebody with pharmacy background. In fact, we're adding an e-com component to our site. So really, I think we need somebody that has that expertise the rest of our team doesn't. And I know that I need this person to be extremely analytical and they need to be data driven. So why don't we look for somebody who was the business analyst in the past? Because that would have given them the skill set before they moved into product, and they'll approach product from that perspective. And thinking through those specifics, getting that clarity is something that people just miss. So take the time to do that, and you will definitely see that you're getting more relevant candidates in your pipeline. So the next thing we'll define is the ideal profile. And in here we'll speak to Jim's question as well. We're going to build the profile of exactly who you will target, right? Note that it says exactly, sorry, it says ideal profile. It doesn't, and we're saying most successful in the role. We're not looking for generic here. We are putting our order into the universe, if you will. We're going to create the specs to make a perfect 3D printed candidate that checks every single box. You start with perfect because you can always pull things away and you can work backwards. But if you cast such a wide range net in the beginning and you don't have the clarity we just went through, you will be in exactly the problem we talked about earlier, which is endless interview cycles, never getting to the right person. So think of the person that would absolutely nail this role, right? What does their career history include? It's exactly what we just talked about a few minutes ago. What type of role should they have been in the past? So we went through that example already. And then in terms of industry experience, will that industry experience be a big factor, right? Do you need them to have startup experience, or is this a highly skilled environment? So, they need to know what great looks like already. The company size piece is really interesting for me because we've been brought in numerous times to rehire when a company's made a bad hire, and it's because they came from massive organizations and they thought, well, let's bring somebody who knows what great looks like. But coming from those organizations, if they don't have experience of working in a smaller, scrappier environment, and I think a lot of you are really familiar with this, it's a really different game. Right? Everybody is doing 3 roles. People need to be hands-on, and more importantly, they need to understand what it's like to operate without resources. A VP of sales is a really good example of this. When we work with smaller companies, I'm not hiring somebody from Google. And the reason is when you call and say you're from Google, everyone knows who the company is, right? There's no education component. So thinking about what industries they've worked in and what company sizes is very important. What personality traits will be effective and really add to the team culture? So if and I'll give an example here, and hopefully it's appropriate enough that for the group. But I work a lot in Salt Lake City. I have quite a few clients there, and it's kind of Silicon Slopes is what they call the area. And I've had a couple of companies that have relocated from LA or relocated from the Bay to move to that area, and the culture is very different. And one of the things that one of my clients had to say to me was, "Look, we want to make sure this hire is successful, and we have an office where we use foul language, and that's going to happen." They said, we've got a bunch of engineers and a bunch of really young people. They've all relocated from different parts of the country, and I want to make sure that we don't bring somebody in who's going to be uncomfortable with that. I want to make sure we bring somebody in who's going to align with the culture. We're not saying that they need to be exactly the same, but we do want to make sure they're comfortable. So that's a small thing you wouldn't often think of, but thinking about who will add to your team culture, and we'll talk about culture a bit more later, that is really important. And what personality traits will be effective in this role. So if we know that you've got a sales team who is all over the place and you need a leader to unify everyone, that's a very different leader than someone who needs to energize a team and really come with a ton of energy for a team that is feeling maybe a bit sullen about some poor results that they've had. So, what kind of a colleague are they, and what kind of a leader are they? I'd say are two very important components. Um, who have they led, and what are they hands-on with? We talked about these pieces earlier. So, if you know that you need somebody to be very hands-on, we're going to make sure that they come with that experience, and that's recent experience. So we know they're comfortable stepping back into those roles. Um, if they've come from a organization and the only leadership experience they have is leading a team of 2, we're putting them into an environment where they're going to lead a team of 50, it's probably going to be a problem. They may not have that skill set. And then what motivates them, I think, is an important question as well. You can come up with some really great screening questions later to make sure that there's a fit here, but you want to make sure that what intrinsically motivates that person aligns with the role that they'll be doing and the team that they have. Now, what problems have they solved and kind of what have they been through? Those I really like to think through in depth. And we often have spent quite a bit there because if you're integrating a newly acquired company into your business, or you plan to do an acquisition, but you don't have executive leaders who have gone through that before, you will need people on your team who've done it, right? Are you going to go public and you need somebody to lean on, let's say, especially in a financial position, or you want to implement new systems and processes and you want somebody who's been through a modernization or a transformation before. Those types of very specific experiences may outweigh your other desired skill sets. You might say, listen, we would love to find somebody who has industry experience, or somebody who is this x components when it comes to leadership. But at the end of the day, if we don't have that skill set on our team, we need to go public and we need to lean on that person, or we need somebody who's been through this transformation to guide us through it, that may outweigh it. So again, we're going to build ideal first. You build perfect, and then we're going to pull layers away once you identify what's most important in your kind of calibration phase. Great. So we are going to try to fly through a couple more of these. Um, I want to think next about the candidate perspective. I suppose I should pause for 1 second and say, we're moving on to a new section. So does anyone have any questions on anything we just went through?
Andrea, I do have one question.
Sure.
As you roll through these, is there a generational element that needs to be taken into consideration? It used to be, certainly when I started early in my career, you fit the mold. And today that doesn't seem to be the case. Has that shifted over the last decade?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of this with, yeah, certainly younger generations, right? I'm going to use an example here. And for the women in the room, I think you'll really relate to this. I see a lot of Gen Z, and I have one of my sister-in-laws is really young, and I live in Las Vegas, just for reference. So when you go out to the Las Vegas Strip, you dress up, you put something nice on, and you wear a pair of high heels. And I can't tell you the back issues that I have from wearing high heels in an office for 15 years, right? And this new generation, they don't do that. They go, "Why? That's not comfortable. I don't want to do that. I'll put a dress on. Maybe I'll put on some lip gloss. I don't want to do makeup. I'm going to wear tennis shoes." And there is this fine line between how proud as women we are of them for not feeling societal pressure to fall into a mold. And there is a part of you that says, that is a rite of passage, lady. And you're always kind of struggling with this and identifying, look, like, yeah, there is a certain part that says you're living in a society and these are the rules of the society. But I think as this younger generation is coming up, whether it's having access to the internet, whether it's being empowered, all of these things, I think there's less of a desire, or maybe it's less of societal programming saying I can only be successful if I fall into this mold. And so if you're having that internal struggle between what you went through or what you had to do in your career, and being happy that someone else doesn't have to do that, but also feeling like they kind of should, I would say lean a bit more on the side of I need to adjust now. I adjusted when earlier in my career and I said, man, I need to fit this mold and I need to do these things, but the world is changing and I need to create an environment and I need to where these people can succeed because ultimately, if they are successful, your business is successful. So it's the best way that I can answer that question. Um, but taking time to decide what is the culture of our organization, and then during the interview process, being very clear about what the culture of your organization is. Right? That might be office culture of, we all dress business casual. We're not in t-shirts. That's just how that's something that we care about as an organization. You dress good, you feel good, all of those things. It might be we are very accepting of, different backgrounds, different types of people, and we want to make sure that we have a really inclusive environment. So once a week we have, a mental wellness session. There's a lot of different components here, but what is really important is that as the executive leadership team, you are clear on what your culture is and you convey that culture appropriately in the interview process because you have culture keepers in your organization. Those people will live the culture. Those people will essentially self-police and say, this is what our organization is like, and we want you to be successful within that. Does that all make sense? Great. Great. Okay, great. So let's think now from the candidate priorities and the candidate perspective. So this leads perfectly into that. So thank you, Dave. This is something a lot of companies miss because they think about their own needs, not the needs of the candidate. A lot of companies struggle with what I would call selling a candidate on a position, right? Especially if the candidate has competing offers from other companies. So it's really important to speak to the things that are important to a candidate, and really think about the candidate experience that you're providing across the board because word does get around. There are plenty of review sites online. People can post reviews of what the interview process was like. So making sure that you have a good candidate experience is important. Now, when you think about your own needs, you might say, listen, I want a candidate who's been the first growth marketing hire at 3 different startups. They've had successful acquisitions and these 17 other things. And we're looking for a purple squirrel. Well, that candidate, maybe they've gone through the startup thing 3 times and they don't know if they want to do that again. They would be really valuable to you if they did, but what's so different about your organization that would get them excited, right? Is it the impact that they'll have, right? Can you clearly state this is the impact that you're going to have in this role? We're going to empower you with these things. These are the things that you'll have responsibility over. Here's what you can control. And how are you going to share that and how do you frame it? Then I think you and your team really need to make sure their goals align with your goals for the role, right? So do you need somebody who's comfortable traveling regularly, like, or do they need to be in office 5 days a week? And remember, these are selling points. So if you do have a remote opportunity, for most people, that's going to be a selling point. So make sure to talk about that and talk about what really what matters to them. Understanding the candidate's needs is something we'll talk about in the interview process. But once you know what is important to a candidate, then you can really sell effectively on the pieces of this opportunity that matches up and aligns with what they're looking for. And so then once they achieve success in this role, what can they grow into? Right? Sometimes we ding candidates in an interview process for asking about growth opportunities. I've seen this a lot. We say, well, we really want them to focus on the role that they're coming in for. So I don't know why they're asking so many questions about the next step. Like we feel like they're not excited about this role. But everybody's looking out for themselves. So of course they want to know what they can grow into. And also they want to make sure that the growth path aligns. Because if you're hiring for an individual contributor today and you need them to grow into a leadership role, but this person is not interested in leadership, you're setting both parties up for failure by not clarifying that. This is also a good time to start thinking about whether your ideal candidate matches your actual budget. Right? We've certainly had difficult conversations with clients over and over again when they create a laundry list of things they're looking for and say, by the way, we pay half of what everybody else is paying for this. So are you being realistic about the profile that you want and the budget that you're working with? Um, and then this piece, equity and profit sharing, sign-ons, relocation fees, all of that. What I'll say here is that when you talk about equity, you are not allowed to say, we offer strong equity, or we are flexible, or we'll figure it out, or for the right person, we will. If you are expecting someone who is making more cash compensation to take a role for half the cash or a significant drop in pay, your team needs to be equipped with the information to position and sell that package. Sure, in an early call, you might say, yes, there's equity included, but very quickly in the process, you need to define your rate, your range of equity that you're offering. You need to figure out where you're flexible in that range. You need to tell your team what they can and can't share. Be very, very specific about when to cover this with candidates, how to disseminate the information. You don't have to give everybody on your team all the details about the strike price and what you expect it to go to, but you do need to define it. You need to decide who's going to talk about it, and they have to have parameters to speak within so that they can do a great job selling the opportunity. In the poll earlier, I believe there are a few people that answered, getting to the end of process and candidates not accepting the offer. This is probably 60% of the reason, right? You get to the end of process, you make an offer, you find out that your budget is misaligned because you're not talking about compensation. You're not talking about equity early enough in the process. It's an easily avoidable problem. Talk about comp early and often. All right. Now, once we have this profile defined, we have the ideal candidate. We know why the role's open. We know what problems they're going to solve. We understand the impact. Everything up to this point has really clarified the scope of the business impact this person will have and what type of profile is best to do that. So we're going to use all that information to create your interview process. And this is going to make by the way, defining that process much easier for you, because at this point, you want to designate the team of interviewers. You include people that they collaborate with. So peers from other departments, culture carriers, we talked about earlier, people who can sell the value of the company, technical assessors. This doesn't necessarily mean, by the way, someone to review a technical assignment, but people who can evaluate their ability to perform in the role, right? So once you've built the team, the key thing here is to get alignment. And the way to get alignment is all the questions that we talked about earlier, the impact of the role, what your ideal candidate profile is, all of those things, that needs to be written down on paper. And it needs to be disseminated to the team. The hiring manager should have at least a launch meeting with the entire interview team to say, look, these are the things we're looking for. If your team is not aligned, if you've gone through all of that work and then you don't include your team and loop them into that information, your interview panel will be interviewing for the wrong things. So getting alignment is very, very important. When we work with candidates, we build a supplementary document. It's called a Role Insights. We do not expect you to build this. We are an elevated recruiting firm, and we like to go the extra mile. We take all the answers to all the questions in discovery. We put them into a beautiful framework. We put them into a document. This document serves a couple of purposes. We share this with candidates so that the candidate understands exactly the business problems they're going to solve, the objectives of the role. This is very different than a job description. It speaks in plain English about what their goals are and what their day-to-day will look like. What's important is that you and your team have a cohesive, consistent story to pitch to candidates. It's great if you can give them this information as well, because the candidates need a guide to understand where to focus their time in the interviews, and your team needs a guide to identify how there's a fit. But if you don't have time to build something like this, it doesn't matter. Get the information out of your brain and onto paper. It doesn't matter if it's pretty. What matters is that it's clear. What matters is that your team knows about it. And what matters is that you can clearly tell that story to a candidate. So your screener, who we'll talk about next, should use this information as essentially their screening guide as well. So instead of giving you that step-by-step interview process, I want to share the top tips that are actually going to make a massive difference in your interview process. And if you've done everything up to this point, you could have a very, very poor interview process. Maybe not very, very, but you could have a pretty poor interview process, and you're probably going to still hire correctly if you took the time to do everything that we talked about earlier today. So I'm going to now launch into the interview section and go through the tips that make a very strong interview process. Before I do that, any other questions? All right.
No other questions that we see. We've got about 5 minutes left in the general session. We can run a little long on that, Andrea. And since we only have Medvaleistas, you can continue on, and we'll just start taking the questions that people have along the way.
Perfect. I'll get through the rest pretty quickly here, and I apologize for it took a little longer. I think the changes last night and the internet outage this morning certainly made a little change in the timing.
Totally understand.
Yeah, let's dive in to the interview tips. So your first call should always be a screening call. On this screening call, your screener will verify the information, They will ask about transitions between roles. They're going to get clarity on glaring or underlying issues, and they should pitch the opportunity to verify it's a fit for what the candidate wants. Again, if you've done everything to this point, you took the time to do all that definition, you have it etched onto a stone tablet or something that your screener has, that your entire interview has. This person should have such a clear picture of who you need that only qualified candidates are moving on to the actual interview stage with the hiring manager. If you don't have someone, whether that's a recruiting coordinator or someone on your team to do an initial screen, you are going to spend so much time on initial calls that you will get sick of it and you will get decision fatigue and you will put the wrong person in through the interview process. You will say, why do we have the wrong candidates interviewing? You will hire the wrong person. Because this is like having a realtor pull homes for you, right? If you just drove around town and drove down every single street and said, oh, there's an open house, let's go look at it. Like, you're looking at the wrong places. You're not screening what houses you should be looking at. You get decision fatigue. You either move into the wrong place or you end up saying, forget it, I'm going to forego my search altogether. I'm just going to stay where I am. And by the way, that result is so relevant because we talk to clients all the time who say, it's been open for a year. We interviewed for 3 months. We got sick of it. It's just, we decided to just keep it in house. We couldn't find the right person. I'm like, well, could you not find the right person? Or did you maybe not take the time to define who you really needed in the first place and then make sure you were only talking to relevant candidates? When we work with clients, we present 3, 4, maybe 5 candidates total. They're on target, in budget, they're excited about the role because we've taken the time to do all of this. If you don't have an agency you're working with, that's fine, but you should have someone aside from the hiring manager take these initial screening calls. The second is everyone reads the notes. Again, I won't dive further into this because we just spent a long time talking about how important it is that your team has the information, but it is really important that your team is aligned and that they have the interview notes. Your screener is going to answer questions about, what those transitions are. Why did they leave each role? If you are wasting time, if numerous people are wasting time on interviews, asking the candidate to walk through their whole career experience, you're wasting the candidate's time and you're wasting your time. You can get that in 3 or 4 bullet points from your screener. You can find out why they left their roles. You're not using your time effectively if everyone is not on the same page about why this person is in process. Um, the hiring manager is going to be, yes, Dave, I will call on you real quickly.
No, go ahead and finish. And when you do, we have a couple questions from the chat.
Great. So call 2 is gonna be with the hiring manager. This hiring manager is the only person who should really say, "Great, why don't you walk me through your background? I'd like you to stay a bit, stay relevant in terms of what we're talking about. If you have a role from 20 years ago and you worked at McDonald's, I don't need to hear about that, right?" But the part I want to talk about here is selling. Once you identify, yes, this person is a good fit, and by the way, again, on paper, they all should be a good fit if the hiring manager is talking to them, selling the candidate on the role is really important. The screener's job is to identify what those candidate motivations are, and then the hiring manager should be selling along the way. I have a client right now that's hiring for a director of project management. I met with the CEO. She's amazing. I love her. I was excited to build her team. We built the interview process. We agreed on a cadence. And then the director of HR stepped in at the last minute and said, I'm going to take all the first calls. That director of HR didn't do any selling. He walked into every interview with skepticism. He made candidates feel that they were not qualified for the role, even though they were. He came in with not just a chip on his shoulder, but an entire cement block on his shoulder. And nobody moved past that first interview stage unless we pushed them through the first interview stage. So your screener is going to pitch the opportunity. Your hiring manager is going to sell the opportunity. You should not have anyone get to the end of process who says, I just don't think this is a fit. I don't think sales is for me. I don't think this is for me. You're selling along the way and you understand what's important to them. So before I go to the next tip, I'll just ask Dave, go ahead and want to read that question.
Sure. Angela asked, any quantitative assessments during hiring that you recommend? Would love to give the assessment to our team members that have done really well in an AI tech startup environment to know what soft/hard skills set people up for success versus those that fail. And she has a follow-on that says also where to find candidates today. They've had 2 failed hires from recruiters and they're out 60K. Those were expensive mistakes and both were sales roles.
Yeah. So the first question then was about, sorry,
Yeah, it was about any quantitative
ethics.
assessments
Yeah, I
that you
think
recommend.
um, I think I have that coming up in the tipster, so I'll speak to that in just a minute. To
Right.
answer your question about where to find candidates, so what you're talking about is a result, and everything we're talking about today solves that problem. So you mentioned you're using recruiting firms. I don't know the level of depth that the recruiting firm went into, but if you didn't go through a process like this to get definition on exactly what you needed, then that is likely the problem, right? And that's why you're getting candidates who aren't solving the problems, because either the problems weren't defined or you didn't define who could solve those problems. If you went through a very, very thorough process and you're getting people who are not producing in the role and they're not working out, especially if it's sales, then I would add, certainly you can add a case study. I'll talk about that here in a second, but I would go back to the drawing board when it comes to what problems are you looking to solve and who can solve those problems. Like, so essentially, if we're talking sales, I have a very specific set of screening questions for sales when we do an intake with a client, and also for each candidate. That's, it's going to start with what product are they selling, who are they selling to, who's the decision maker, what size of the organization did they come from, what size of the organization are they selling to. So I'll send a follow-up package that has all that information. But if the sales candidates are not aligned with that, if they don't have the specific components that are going to make them successful, that's likely it. If all of that is true and you've done all of that, then you need to look internally and say, what is the common reason that these people are not successful? It might not be our interview process. It might be the operations of our sales team. It might be our product market fit and other things that are not necessarily related to the interview process. So hopefully that answers that question. All right. So next point here, sorry, fourth is each interviewer has a purpose. Look, what I'll say here is, again, not everybody should be asking the same questions. You are going to be extremely intentional about creating your interview panel. And what that means is if your CMO is interviewing a sales leader, that conversation should be about how that sales leader has worked with marketing in the past and the expectations of that relationship. If the CFO is interviewing a VP of operations, the conversation should be about P&L. It should not be around operational workflows. Let your subject matter experts evaluate how strong that person is in their area and evaluate what that collaboration will be like. Everybody needs to define what a successful relationship will look like, and everyone should be asking, how have they worked with that function in the past? The questions really should relate specifically to the competencies that person was assigned to evaluate. Now, Jim, you asked earlier about like leadership qualities and things like that. So those are what I would call competencies. And in the follow-up information, I'm going to send over a list of competencies and some suggested questions for each. Your competencies should be, each person should be evaluating at least one competency. And if they're not, they don't need to be interviewing that person. The next, I think, is fairly self-explanatory, really situational and behavioral questions. So, I'll give a quick example. I know we're running short on time, but I can't not share this. I was once asked in an interview, how many fire trucks are there in the United States? I was like, I thought that I was interviewing to sell software, right? It sounds ridiculous. And of course, what they were trying to understand was how they were trying to assess how I would logic the situation, right? What logic I would use, how I would approach a problem, or did I freeze like a deer in headlights? Granted, this was in the early 2000s. Today, I would say I would use ChatGPT and probably get a fairly accurate answer. But the point is, you want to ask questions that are outside the box. If you wanted to catch somebody, off guard because you know that there are going to be a lot of things that pop up and you want to see how they deal with situations that they can't expect, great, ask those questions. But you also want the rehearsed answers, right? You don't go to a Beyonce concert to hear the new stuff. You go to hear the hits. And I think somebody is really proud of some moments in their career, then you should let them brag about their accomplishments. Just make sure that you're asking about things that are relevant to your role, right? Tell me a time when you solved XYZ. And that leads to the case studies question. So real world problems and challenges, you can also include technical assessments here. If you're not doing a case study wherein you ask candidates to solve a very realistic challenge that they'll face in the role, then I think asking them how they would approach problems that you've actually faced can stand in the place of that. Now, what I recommend is ask questions of problems you've already solved or at least attempted to solve. Because if you're giving them a problem that you're currently working on, it does feel like homework and you're asking them to work for free for you. So when you give case studies, when you give problems or situations, you can If it's something you're currently dealing with, you can ask about their approach. If it's something you've already solved, you can ask for detail. You can give them a week and say, we want you to prepare and present how you would solve this problem. But for technical assessments, depending on the level of technical assessment is where you would put that in the interview process. I'm going to guess that was a part of the question that was asked. So if it is a make or break and you absolutely cannot talk to anybody or you cannot hire somebody unless they have a certain level, you can put it much earlier in the interview process. You can do it right after that screening call. You could even do it before the screening call, depending on the level of the role. But for executive level roles, typically it's going to be an assessment that's more aligned with strategic thinking or problems that they've solved in the past. So you want to put those towards the end of process. I will go quickly here. So the last couple pieces here are scoring. Listen, the most important component is just that you have a scoring system. And what I mean by scoring system is a very clear decision-making structure. I'm not going to go into great detail on what we suggest and what we offer to clients in terms of scorecards, but what I'll say is this. If you do not have a system for scoring, people are going to default to their gut feeling. And there's nothing wrong with gut feeling. You can literally build gut feeling into your scorecard. You can give a line that says gut feeling, 1 through 5, 1 through 4, whatever your system is. But please have a scorecard because not everybody's great at communicating what they did and didn't like. Not everybody understands the assignment, if it were. So make sure you have a scoring system, and then you can make a data-driven decision and say, listen, anybody over 70% is a hire. And the last, next up here is follow up. Follow up, what I mean here is just incredibly important in terms of candidate communication. A candidate should have a single point of contact to discuss process, scheduling, and feedback. That person should be judicious about sharing feedback and ensure that the feedback passed on will either sell them further or prep them for the next interview or take them, or if you're taking them out of process, it should be constructive and relevant rather than ambiguous and frustrating. Candidates come back to us all the time at every single level. I mean, I have placed everything from a single product manager to like CTOs, CMOs, CSOs. And when they don't get feedback, everyone's feeling is the same. I feel like my time is wasted. I don't understand why they wouldn't provide some level of feedback about why I wasn't a fit. And yes, I understand there are legal implications and you have to be cautious, but you can still share feedback that is constructive for someone. And if it's just that another candidate edged them out a little bit because they had stronger experience in X, then you can tell them that too. But it is important that you are following up with candidates, especially at the VP and C level, because those candidates are likely going to be candidates for other roles of yours in the future, or they're going to be in your network somehow. So closing the loop and creating a good candidate experience is very important. And lastly here, culture is everyone's job, right? And culture, we mentioned earlier, what I'll say here is that culture fit is not a term that I love. Culture fit often means, do they walk, talk, and look like me? What I would really ask yourself is, who could add to our culture? How do we bring in a diverse thinking? Diversity, I know, is a thing that is a really hot topic right now, and there's a lot of talk on both sides. What I will say is timeless is people who come from different backgrounds bring a diversity of thought that you will not get from a bunch of people in the room who think alike. So ask yourself, how does this person add to our cultural diversity when it comes to diversity of thought? So you'll see here for personality, when you think about who you want on your team, nobody wants somebody that has a very big ego, that blames other people, etc. So when you are designing your interview questions, looking for things like a pattern of blame, we'll suss out ego. Looking for a pattern of perfect performance, we'll suss out if they're lying. And asking them how they've handled difficult situations, we'll suss out uh, how they respond in the face of failure. Does someone resilient? Do they go back and say, how can I solve these problems? What did I do wrong? How would I do it differently? Asking those types of questions will really help to identify someone's resilience. The last piece is, I'll send this out since we don't have time to go through it today, but we talked a lot about CEOs and executive hires today. We have a special product that we offer with a partner of ours who is a right-hand expert. And when we talk about right hand, we're talking about second in command. I know Pam, I believe that you've worked with Heather, or you know her. She is incredible at helping CEOs understand what they need to get off their plate so that they can lean into their superpowers. They can focus on vision and strategy. I explained this morning how my internet went out, and I am the CEO, but I am somehow very, very involved in the daily operations. And so resetting the router and the internet. And this morning I said, you know what? Where is my right hand? I'm going to have to wake him up, and I'm going to have him take care of all this so I can do my hair for all of you this morning. So the idea that CEOs often are caught up in that day to day and they are too operational. It does not allow them to really step into their greatness and to lead the company the way they should. This is what the Right Hand Advantage program is really all about. It's understanding where your superpowers are, what to get off your plate. We come in and hire for that. And then our partner does 6 months of onboarding and coaching for both the CEO and the right hand. So that is enough for me. It's time to hear from you guys. Let's hear all the questions.
Well, thank you, Andrea, very much.